I gotta tell you, man, I was not treated well. And so much of the time I spent was trying to kind of point out, well, not all conservative Christians are fundamentalists. There are actually conservative Christians that are thoughtful, that have come to terms with this in different ways. And that was like a category that didn't really even exist for them in a lot of ways. I know most about origins. Okay, so that's the place where I really entered this. And for me, like I came from a very conservative Christian background. I would actually say a more fundamentalist background. And I kind of encountered evolution, and that's how I really started to change my views and thinking about things. But I really moved to a much more historically grounded Christianity. It was more informed. It was more in touch with the traditions of the church. It was still Protestant and all that. I didn't become a Catholic, but I really found out, oh, like this kind of fundamentalist approach to Christianity isn't even historical Christianity.
Yeah.
Um, but when I started working with BioLogos, that's when I first really encountered a large number of progressive Christians, and I was really um, a minority there. I mean, I would maybe even unique in some ways in terms of working with them. And I gotta tell you, man, I was not treated well. And so much of the time I spent was trying to kind of point out, well, not all conservative Christians are fundamentalists. There are actually conservative Christians that are thoughtful, that have come to terms with this in different ways. And that was like a category that didn't really even exist for them in a lot of ways. I remember I got really strong negative reactions merely for just telling people that I affirmed the Lasan covenant because of what it said about inerrancy. And I'm like, what do you have a problem with this minor statement? And they had such an allergic reaction, in large part from reading books like Pete Enns. That I mean, it was just such a strong negative and condescending reaction, kind of like I just didn't understand what I was talking about, which is not the case. Okay. And I think the place where I got the most concerned is how science was being deployed, where BioLogos really was really misrepresenting, knowingly or unknowingly, that's for them to figure out. But they were really misrepresenting the scientific evidence about Adam and Eve, not about common descent. There really is good evidence that we share common ancestors with the great apes. And to the point, where there are books that they've had that are, I'd say, uh, it's accurate to say the central thesis of the books are entirely wrong, but they've issued no erratums and are still promoting those books. And I think it's incredibly destructive to the church. So that's kind of my context. And the reason why they've given me for that is because they don't. I mean, is because they really think it's that conservative Christianity has to change, and it's not really that hopeful to correct the science on those things because it'll just confuse people to think that conservative Christianity doesn't have to change. That's what they've told me, and so I really think that that's an issue, and
Sure.
that's how. I mean, I would say those are my most salient experiences with progressive Christianity, and I'm not saying that. I mean, I can get as specific as you want me to on those things. And so when I see that, it's very hard to be too critical of Elisa on this stuff because I can see.
They're doing it so she can do it. That's, I mean,
Well, I would wish that she shouldn't. I mean, I wish that she
yeah.
wouldn't. I already told you what I wish she would do.
Yeah. Like if you wrote a book critiquing one of those books you've just referenced and said, these are the reasons this book's thesis is false, why it's harmful. I wouldn't say to you, yeah, but why didn't you write a book about something else? I would say, okay, I'm going to evaluate that book on its own terms. So, I mean, I agree with you on that. I just don't think that the
Well, so
fact
about
that,
your book, what I think is interesting about it is if we scale back her thesis to what I think is defensible, she is not saying. I mean, she shouldn't say that you're not Christian, okay, or that you're not saved, or that or I think even saying it's another gospel is. I mean, maybe it works for a title, but it has to be so qualified as not to mean that when you get down farther, or at least to allow for the fact that many progressives are preaching the same gospel. Um, but but the way I would put it is that, progressive Christians are a different type of Christianity in important ways, in the same way that there are different types of denominations. That's not necessarily a negative statement. That's even how they've described themselves. The way how
Well,
Brian
we have
McLaurin
to be
puts it.
careful when we say they. I mean, you know, you are relative to some people and their categorizations a progressive Christian in virtue of, as you said a moment ago, recognizing common ancestry with the great apes. So if to some degree we could begin to concede a little more that progressive Christianity is not some reified creedal system of belief, but rather is a spectrum, and we're all to some degree on the spectrum relative to other
Well,
people,
I
then
mean,
we could break down the
theologically,
in-group,
I'm far
out-group
more
thing.
aligned with conservative Christians than I am with progressive Christians, and so it wouldn't. I think that's part of why.
I
That's
don't
part of
think
why
Ken
I
Ham
work
would be very happy with you.
with them too, is because uh, when I talked about evolution, it hasn't come with wholesale revisions of their theology. It's really come in a way that makes sense within conservative Christianity. Um,
Yeah, but the
so,
young Earth creationists aren't going to say that. So I mean, it
well, I
depends
don't
who you
know.
ask.
I don't
That's
know
my
about that.
point.
I actually don't know about that. I think um, I actually don't know about that. There are actually several Earth creationist leaders that I know that have said things along those lines.
Well, I remember, for example, when I was at a conference some years ago at well, not AAR, ETS, and so I think it was ETS. And then they were going to feature a panel, and they're going to have BioLogos, and they're going to have, I think, Hugh Ross, Reasons to Believe, and then they wanted to have someone from Answers in Genesis, and Answers in Genesis refused to participate. Um, so, I mean, I don't think that Answers in Genesis is going to be on
Yeah,
board,
but Answers in
recognizing that
Genesis
you're a conservative.
isn't the only young Earth creationists out there. There's a
You know,
lot of them.
but my point is simply that if we're going to count you as a conservative or a progressive, it's going to depend on whose opinion counts. And that's just a reminder that these are relative contextualized terms. They're not terms that map onto two clearly distinct groups.